Hi, everybody. We're going to look at the problems 10 through the end where we're verifying trig identities. But first, the reason I'm on this page is because I wanted to look at some of the rules just as a reminder. So whether we're simplifying or verifying, usually the first thing we do is we change everything to sine cosine. All right, so notice that cosecant here is 1 over sine, secant is 1 over cosine. Some of these are nice to know as well, but we don't use them real often. We tend more to change everything to sine and cosine, including here. Tan is sin over cos, cotan is cos over sin. Also remember these identities. Anytime you see a 1 or any of these squared, sine squared, cosine squared, cotangent squared, cosecant squared, any of these squared, go back and look at these identities. So this is the main one. Sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. But we can also divide everything there by sine, and we end up with this one. We can divide the original one by cosine squared, and we get that one. But again, the main point is anytime you see a 1 or a sine squared, cosine squared, any of them squared, think, oh, Pythagorean identities, I should go look at those. So these are just some rules for verifying, which is just proving the one side looks like the other side, there's an equal sign, or simplifying, you're trying to make it as simple as possible. So one is turn everything to sine cosine. That's just about always my first step, most of the time. Some other trips, bring terms together, and we do that by finding a common denominator. So if we have a plus or a minus, try to bring the terms together. Look at those Pythagorean identities, that sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1, etc. Get rid of fractions within fractions. So that might mean instead of dividing by a fraction, you multiply by the reciprocal, right? So get rid of fractions within fractions. Look up common factors. So if you see two terms, you have a plus or minus and there's a common factor, it might help to pull out a common factor. If you need to multiply by 1, a lot of times that is in order to find a common denominator. We use that. Multiply by sin over sin, cos over cos. Multiplying by the conjugate. I don't know that that's going to come up, but that is just like if we had a cosine plus 1, we might multiply by cosine minus 1. I wouldn't worry too much about that one. All right, so let's look at the worksheet. Here, we're going to go down to number 10. Okay, so this is simplifying. So in this case, my goal is just to make things as absolutely simple as possible. There's no equal sign. So again, like I said before, I'm going to start by changing everything to sine and cosine. So I know cosecant is related to sine. So I'm going to rewrite that as 1 over sine. If you want to change that to an x, change it to an x. Cotangent, that is the same as cos over sin. Cos over sin. Okay, now I have a fraction within a fraction. So I think what I'll do is if I take this top fraction divided by the bottom fraction, that is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of cos over sin is sin over cos, right? So we just took this bottom fraction and we flipped it. And then I look to see if we notice anything. And it looks like sine over sine crosses off. So we're left with 1 over cosine. And then 1 over cos is equal to secant. So I don't have an equal sign that says equal secant, but I'm pretty sure I'm done because I can't make things any simpler than that. All right, number 11. So I think the first thing, again, I'm going to change everything to sine cosine, which would be this. So I'll copy over sin, and I'm going to see what happens with cotangent. That's cos over sin. Now I can't cross anything off. It's tempting to, I see we have this sin here and the sin on the bottom, but these are two different terms. Those are two different terms. They're separated by a plus. I cannot cross those off. It has to be within the same term. So what I probably want to do, because I have two different terms, is come up with a common denominator between the right part here that I circled in the yellow. I'll highlight it more with circling in pink. Come up with a common denominator. So I have a denominator of sine there. I could come up with a denominator of sine here. And I can do that by multiplying the top by sine and the bottom by sine. All right, because then I'm left with sine times sine is sine squared. And my denominator is sine. Okay, so what I just did is I multiplied this and this. So I got sine squared on top, sine on the bottom. And cos times cos is cos squared over sine. But now that I have a common denominator, I can take this whole numerator, sine squared plus cosine squared, and put it over sine. All right, so I look at that. What can I do with it? Well, again, this looks like an identity. So we're kind of looking at it. What can we do? That looks familiar. That sine squared plus cosine squared, I can replace with a 1. And then 1 over sin is cosecant. Again, I don't have an equal sign, but I don't think I can make things any simpler than that. Okay, we'll do a couple more simplifying, and then we'll do a couple verifying ones. All right, so just like the others, I'm going to start with sine and cosine. So I'll do the top here. Secant is 1 over cos. I'm going to do an x, like, who needs the theta? Tan is sine over cosine. We have a fraction within a fraction. So I'm going to take this divided by this, which is 1 over cos times, instead of sin over cos, cos over sin. But now, because this is really, I can put it all within one fraction if I want to, but now I can cross off. I can cross off cos over cos. If there's a plus in between, I cannot do that. So just be very careful about that. This is 1 over sine, and 1 over sine is cosecant. But we got secant and cosecant several times, just kind of by coincidence. All right, we'll start again. Cotangent is cos over sin. Cos is cos. Well, I look at that. I can treat the bottom like a fraction, because remember, I can make anything into a fraction by putting it over 1. The other thing is I noticed that the numerator has a sign at the top. So I could multiply by 1, sine over sine, and then I would get rid of the fraction that way. Doesn't matter. There's more than one way you can do these things, which is what makes it sometimes a little harder. Sometimes more options make it more difficult. But then if I multiply it by the reciprocal of this one, the reciprocal, instead of cos over 1, 1 over cos, and cos over cos. Good grief, another cosecant, another cosecant. All right. I don't want you to think they're all cosecants. It's just kind of a coincidence. Just double checking. We don't have any that's the same, right? Nope. So just kind of a coincidence. 3 out of 4 of them ended up being cosecant. All right. So if we're verifying there's just an equal sign, but really I just take the more complicated sign and I would just do the same thing. Well, at least I can see that this is not a cosine this time, or a cosecant this time. It should look like a cosine, but I'm not going to pay much attention to it until I'm done. Cotangent is cosine over sine. Cosecant is 1 over sine. Just like before, I'm going to go cos x sine, and I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. I'm going to multiply by sine over 1. So I'm really not looking much at the other side at all. I'm doing it just like the ones I was doing before. See if I can cross anything off. I end up with cos over 1. And what do you know? That's cos, right? So this cos on the left is now equal to the cos on the right. Okay, yeah, I just had that just so we could see. Maybe it'd be easier if I did it like this, just so we can see left and right side. Okay, one more. Again, I'm going to do the more complicated side, and it's pretty obvious the more complicated side is the left. So I'm going to just work on the left side. I guess we'll change everything to sine, cosine, see what we come up with. So sine of x, cosine of x. We're changing that tan to sin over cos. All right, I guess I need to move this over here because I ran out of room. It's too big. This is plus cos squared. All right, so the equal sign is here for now. Okay, now just again, remember this is all one term here. This is one term here. Terms are separated by plus and minus signs. So anything on in that left circle there can be crossed off top to bottom. And I notice that cos over cos can be crossed off. And I'm left with sine times sine. So I'm left with a sine times a sine, which is sine squared. And then this, of course, is cosine squared. And well, that looks pretty darn familiar. Sine plus cosine squared is 1. And 1 is equal to 1. So we are done. All right, so just kind of a reminder with these, just remember to follow the tips. Just about always start by changing everything to sine, cosine. And no matter if there's an equal sign or no equal sign, you're just trying to make things as short and compact as possible. Bring terms together, so get rid of the pluses and minuses in between by maybe finding a common denominator, seeing if you can bring them together and making them as simple as possible. And if you need help, make sure and ask your teacher.